It's round 2 of the Tata Steel Masters, and this is the game of the day, played between the tournament leader Alireza Firouzja playing with the white pieces against Parham Maghsoodloo. The two know each other very well, of course. They are both originally from Iran. And well, nowadays we know that Firouzja is representing France, but it's always interesting to play against someone you know really well, you have trained with a lot, and this game has a lot of nice tactical ideas. So I'm really looking forward to share my insights on this game as I have been discussing it today with the Dutch audience live at the tournament venue. Let's have a look together. Make sure to subscribe for more interesting games from this event. It's a Berlin opening. E4, E5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, knight f6. Castling kingside, knight takes e4. We do get to see very long theoretical variation, which is very popular at the highest level. White goes for the move rook e1, attacking the knight on e4. The knight goes back to d6, knight takes e5, bishop e7 to avoid any problems along the e file. Now the bishop is threatened to be taken, so the bishop goes back to f1, and now knight takes e5, rook takes, castling kingside, d4, and the bishop goes to f6 to hit the rook. The rook goes back to e1, rook e8. And the question is, okay, are a lot of pieces just going to be swapped here? There are a lot of long lines, a lot of pieces can be exchanged as well, and it's often becoming a very boring game. But with Firouzja handling this Berlin variation, you know that you can expect some fireworks. He goes for the move bishop f4. This is the first interesting moment in the game because it's a pawn sacrifice. After rook takes e1, queen takes e1, the pawn on d4 can be taken here. If you do take on d4, there is bishop takes d6. And after taking back with the pawn on d6, these pawns are very ugly, and the point is that the knight will come to c3, rook will come to d1, and white gets very nice piece play as compensation for the pawn. So that's an interesting line, interesting idea. The other main plan here for black, instead of taking the pawn on d4, is to improve the knight. And you do that by going back to the e8 square. The knight is badly placed on d6. The point of this move is that the knight itself is not looking great on e8, but you're preparing to advance the pawn to d5. So here we go. The knight goes to c3. This is interesting idea. So you do control the d5 square, and still the pawn can be taken. And now that pawn was actually taken by black. Bishop takes d4, and the knight comes in to d5. So here we see that the knight hits the pawn on c7. It's not really well defended by the queen and the knight on e8 because there are always back rank issues. That's one of the main problems. Here the move d6 is played so that the bishop no longer hits the pawn on c7. Here, the bishop finds an alternative plan. Bishop g5 attacking the queen, and of course, the queen is unable to take it because of queen takes e8 with checkmate. So here, the theoretical line continues with the move f6 to neutralize the threat, hitting the bishop, and the bishop goes to h4. Now another interesting moment, as just only a few months ago, Alireza Firouzja had this position with the black pieces in St. Louis in a game with Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. And there, the move g5 was played, very aggressive move to kick the bishop out. This time, Maghsoodloo decides to take the second pawn with the move bishop takes b2. He's attacking the rook, but the rook goes to b1, hits the bishop goes back to e5, and now another very sharp move, f4, attacking the bishop on e5. So white is of course 2 pawns down, but trying to seize the initiative by challenging that bishop on e5. And here, interestingly, a few years ago, this position was also reached by Alireza Firouzja in a game played online against Sam Savian. In that game, the main theoretical move c6 was played, and here there are still around 20 games in the Mega database. There are a lot of Grandmaster games there and correspondence play as well. Let's not go there. The alternative here is to challenge the knight in a different way. You don't have to move the bishop yet. from e5, but instead the bishop from c8 was brought into play. Bishop e6 is played, but apparently this is not such a good move. It seems very logical to get your bishop into the game with tempo to hit the knight on d5. So after pawn takes bishop, bishop captures knight, and black is absolutely alright. Instead of taking the bishop on e5, there follows the move bishop c4. So the bishop comes back into the game. And now there are, of course, ideas to put pressure against the king on g8. First, black moves the bishop away with check. Bishop d4, king goes into the corner. Now the bishop is no longer on e5. The bishop on e6 is under threat. So black gotta do something about that. Played here the move bishop f7. Very logical move. But here, still 2 pawns down. White is playing very actively and accurately. He goes for the move queen e4, hitting the bishop. And I think this is a critical moment in the game as well. There are not that many good moves here for black. You can move the bishop away from d4 to c5, for instance, which was the game's continuation. The alternative is to play the move c6 to attack the knight. But then it's knight e7 check, king f8. You do have time to take on f7. And whatever happens very soon, the rook will take on b7 as well. For instance, if you take on e7 here, the queens will come off the board. But after rook takes b7, it's white who is still dominating with the rook and the bishop pair. That's ample compensation for the pawn. Instead, Maghsoodloo decided to go back with the bishop to c5. But now, critical move, and there are still a lot of possibilities, but knight e7 is the way to go forward here as white. It's a check. It's the first move which needs to be considered. There are only 2 squares, but the king got to keep the bishop defended. So therefore the king goes to f8 and it even hits the knight on e7. So what should white do now? For instance, if you decide here to swap the bishop on f7, then rather than taking that bishop, you play here queen takes, offering the exchange of queens, and after that the bishop is hanging. You don't want to go for this line. A much better move, and this leads to incredibly sharp play, is the move queen takes h7, and now everything is simply hanging. The knight on e7, the bishop on c4. Let's discuss all the critical moves. First of all, queen takes knight is just losing on the spot. It runs into queen h8 check, and if you block with the bishop, the queen will capture and it's checkmate. So taking the knight with your queen is not an option. King takes is possible, but also not recommended, because there will follow rook to e1 with check. If the king tries to run away, now you see bishop takes f7. White is regaining the material. He's a pawn down, but look at this knight. The knight is just trapped, and white is he's just about to take it on the next move. And the knight cannot go away. There's no convenient way to support the knight. Black is losing material. So that's also not a possibility. The other capture played in the game is very logical. Bishop takes c4. Let's see what happens after this move, because now you are just a piece up. But the forcing continuation, queen h8 check, doesn't lead anywhere. King takes knight, and if you give a check with your rook on e1, the king goes to d7, and here we see that black is a piece up, 2 pieces up. In fact, I've lost the count myself as well, and well, this is just not what you should do. Instead, and this was very nicely calculated by Firouzja in the game, is that rather than giving a check, you first bring your rook into the attack. The rook has done its job on the b file. Now it's on e1, supporting the knight on e7, which is nicely standing inside black's position. If you do play a random move, the main idea behind white's last move is to go queen h8, no time to take the rook, of course, to take the knight, I mean, and after king f7, it's queen g8 with checkmate. So that's very clear. And if you decide here to do something about that mating threat, well, there are not many options, in fact, in the game. Black decided now to give up the queen. Queen takes, knight, rook takes, king takes, 2 bishops, and a rook for the queen. But it's queen e4 check, double attack. Bishop interferes, black is trying to save the bishop, but then it's f5, hitting the bishop on e6. And you cannot avoid the loss of that piece. Black decided to play here the move rook d8. And here, very instructive moment for all of you, because there are 2 possibilities. You can take with the pawn, the bishop, or you can take with the queen. But you're not in a rush because this bishop is pinned. And look at the move played by Firouzja. This is absolutely amazing. He goes for the move g4. And now you may think, what is he really trying to do? Well, black goes for c6. And still, this bishop on e6 can be taken in 2 different ways, but the move g5 is played. And this is incredibly strong, because you have ideas to get the pawn involved in the mating attack as well. If you do play a move like d5, then it's queen takes e6. Now, you're kind of forced to move your queen. So you do take on e6, the king goes away, and it's g6. And the next move, it's queen f7 with checkmate, and that's why white really needs that g-pawn to be mobilized. Well, then, instead of playing the move d5, Maghsoodloo played here an interesting move we are going to discuss as well. I had a lot of fun analyzing this position with the Dutch crowd here, because I was looking at this move, knight c7. And then one suggestion here is to take with the pawn on f6. G takes f6. And of course you're no longer able to take with the queen because the knight is on c7 protecting it. You can, of course, take with the pawn on e6. And this is technically winning. I mean, that's pretty clear, pretty obvious. But one line suggested here is this move. Bishop takes f6. It's a very tempting tactical idea. But after king takes queen h4, you're planning to win the rook on d8. But after king takes f5, if you do take the rook now, look at this. It's bishop d5. Look at this bishop mate. Double bishop checking the king in the corner. It's checkmate. Of course, that's something you should definitely not allow. And of course, a player of Firouzja's class, he will not fall into such ideas. After the move g5, black didn't go for the move knight c7. He went with his king back to f8, and now it's f takes e6. Threatening to play the move e7 with a double attack, hitting the king and the rook. If you play the move d5 to attack the queen, and the bishop now covers the e7 square, then it's queen g6. So here you see the queen and pawn are reversed, but still this mating idea with queen f7 is very difficult to meet. Anyway, didn't happen in the game. Black didn't go for the move d5, played instead the move king e7 to block the pawn with your king. But now it's g takes f6. Black decided to take back with the pawn. You can also take with the knight, but then it's queen g4 with a lot of pressure against the pawn on g7. The knight, of course, is pinned, cannot go away, and this is technically winning for white. G takes f6 played in the game, but how is white eventually going to convert it? Well, there's a very instructive maneuver, because what you really want is to get his queen from e4 to f7. But when moving the queen around, you don't want to give up your pawn from e6. That's a very important asset for your position. So look at this very subtle queen maneuver. Queen g4, keeping the pawn defended. d5 played, and now the queen comes to g8, still maintaining control over that pawn on e6. Now, there is a huge threat. If you do move the knight away, it's queen f7, check, king d6, bishop to g3 with checkmate. That's not a possibility. Going with your knight to the other square, well, various possibilities. Queen g7 should lead to mate as well. The move I looked at during the analysis is bishop takes f6, which is also good and perhaps even simpler. After king takes, the king is no longer defending the rook, and white is easily going to win this position with a queen versus 2 minor pieces. So, no possible defense here. Bishop d4 is played. That's an interesting attempt. Now, before giving a check on f7, white played the move bishop g3 to take away this d6 square from the black king. So, this is a serious threat, the move queen f7. How are you going to deal with it? Well, very good question. If you do play knight d6, can simply take with the bishop. You gotta take with the rook, and then it's queen f7. King gotta go back. Now you push your pawn. King goes away, and you get a new queen with check. Game over. So, knight d6 was also not played. Bishop e5 on the board. Now bishop takes, pawn takes. Okay, it's rook versus knight. Rook and knight versus a queen. But this h-pawn is really strong. So, no time to wait any longer. You bring up your h-pawn. And black is totally stuck. This knight from e8 has been there for a long time. Had been restricted by pawns on d6 and f6. Now they are no longer there. Well, there's still no good way to untangle. Knight f6 runs into queen f7 check. When the king goes away, you take the knight. Also, if you do move your knight to d6, then it's queen g5 with a skewer. The king goes back to e8, then you just keep on running with your pawn, and black is simply not in time to stop it. Instead, black tried here to move e4, but after h5, it just looks absolutely hopeless. d4 played, queen f7 check now, king d6, pawn to e7, hitting the rook. Rook got to keep the knight defended, otherwise the white queen is gonna take the knight. So rook c8. But now the pawns are really weak. Queen f4, simple check. You're about to win this pawn. King d5 runs into queen f5 with a double attack. You're winning the rook. King takes pawn was played. Just take the pawn with check. King d7, take another pawn with check. Now it's knight d6 on the board, and after h6, well, Maghsoodloo had seen enough. Resigned this game, this position. The h-pawn is just too strong as the queen covers the promotion square. What an amazing game. And you see how impressively Firouzja managed to crush his opponent with a very nice sharp line, sort gambit line, sacrificing 2 pawns against the Berlin. Very, very nice game. For me, the most exciting game of the round. Actually, maybe the most exciting game of the tournament so far, but we have played only 2 rounds and there are 13 rounds in total. So much more exciting games coming up soon. Stay tuned for the latest updates by subscribing to this channel. Thank you. See you soon.